Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
There's something strange about watching people pretend to care when you're walking out the door for the last time. They smile, they pat you on the back, they make small talk like they didn't spend the last 20 years forgetting your name on purpose. My name's Michael Trent, and I gave Greystone Logistics 2 decades of my life. 2 decades of deadlines, weekends sacrificed, office politics swallowed, and ideas handed over without credit. And today, I stood in the break room under flickering fluorescent lights while people I trained acted like they remembered my birthday. The cheap supermarket cake had "We'll miss you, Mike" scrawled on it in icing that tasted like plastic and sugar. Half the people there thought I was leaving for another job. The other half probably thought I was dying. I wasn't going out with a bang. I wasn't fired. I wasn't promoted. I wasn't retiring with a fat pension and a golden watch. I had just worn out my welcome. Slowly, quietly, without making noise, like office furniture that stops being useful, but is too big to throw out without someone signing a form. And today, that someone finally signed the damn form. The room was full but silent in that weird way where everyone's just waiting for the mandatory speech so they can get back to pretending they're busy. I stood next to the cake, holding a paper plate with a slice I didn't ask for, trying to figure out if the people in front of me were being polite or if they actually gave a damn. And then Jerry walked in. Gerald Mathers, my boss for the last 9 years. You know the type. Good teeth, good suits, always smiling like he knows something you don't. He was the kind of guy who called himself a people person, but never knew his secretary's last name. He strutted to the front like he was hosting a game show and tapped the side of a plastic cup like it was crystal. The fake laughter started immediately. He raised his cup and looked at me, and I swear, he smirked like he was about to deliver the punchline of a joke only he found funny. "Well," he said, and the room hushed. "I guess today we say goodbye to our dear Michael. He's been with us for what is it? 23 years. 22, I said, not correcting him out of pettiness, but because I still remembered every year. He nodded like it didn't matter. Right, 22. A solid number. Almost as long as I've been married. Though at least my wife still yells at me sometimes. Michael's been so dependable. Steady. You know, just always there. Like office wallpaper, really." There were a few chuckles. I didn't laugh. "And that's what we need sometimes, right?" he continued. "Not everyone can be a star. Not everyone needs to lead the charge. Sometimes we need people to just be there. Quietly. Holding the fort. Just filler. The glue in the cracks." And that was it. He smiled at me, raised his cup higher. "To Michael. The quiet filler in the wall of Greystone. We'll miss your silence." The room clapped. Some awkwardly. Some because they thought they should. Some maybe because they agreed. I didn't say a word. I raised my cup, made eye contact with Jerry for just a second too long, and drank. Then I placed the empty cup on the table, wiped my hands on a napkin, and walked out. No speech. No rebuttal. No thank you. I got into my car, turned the key, and sat there in the parking lot, letting the AC hum while my thoughts screamed. 22 years. I had trained 4 people who now outranked me. I had been passed over for promotion 6 times. I had worked through the flu, through my divorce, through my dad's funeral. I'd never taken more than 5 vacation days in a row. I kept the team running while Jerry was off playing golf and networking with clients at overpriced steak joints. I was the guy who caught everyone else's mistakes at midnight. The guy who fixed the budget after they blew it. The guy who stayed. But I was never the guy they saw. I didn't cry that night. I didn't drink myself stupid or rage post on Facebook. I went home, microwaved leftover lasagna, sat in my kitchen with the light off, and opened a spiral notebook. I wrote 1 sentence on the first page in all caps. Names that clapped. Then I made a list. One by one. I remembered the smirks. The eyes that didn't meet mine. The people who laughed too loud, clapped too hard, or just didn't bother showing up at all. The first name I wrote was Gerald Mathers. And when I closed that notebook, I smiled for the first time that day. Not because I felt better, but because something shifted. Quietly, like a cold wind under the door. I didn't know what I'd do with that list. Not yet. But I knew this much: retirement wasn't the end. It was just the start of something I hadn't dared allow myself to feel in 22 years. Anger. And maybe, if I played it right, revenge. The first few weeks after leaving Greystone passed in a strange, foggy kind of silence, like the world had finally taken its foot off my neck, but forgot to tell me what I was supposed to do next. I woke up without an alarm for the first time in years, and instead of feeling liberated, I felt useless, like an unplugged machine still humming out of habit. The first day was okay. The second day, I rearranged the garage for no reason. By the end of the first week, I had watched 23 episodes of a home renovation show I didn't even like, just to feel like something was being fixed around me. You'd think 22 years of work would at least earn you some sense of satisfaction, maybe a little pride, or even a financial cushion to float you. But corporate loyalty doesn't cash out well these days. My severance package was thin, 3 months of pay and a handshake, and Social Security still felt like a far-off whisper. My savings were respectable, not impressive. Enough to keep me afloat for maybe 8 months if I cut back on everything. I did what anyone in my position would do. I updated my LinkedIn profile, attached a half-decent picture from a wedding 3 years ago, and started applying for consulting roles like it was a numbers game. By week 3, I had applied to 27 roles. By week 4, it was 71. I got one callback, which turned out to be a recruiter looking for someone 10 years younger, with half my salary expectations. They never called again. It's a hell of a thing to realize the industry you helped build doesn't have room for you anymore, especially when your experience doesn't translate into buzzwords and agility and scaling at speed. I was a fossil in a fossil-fueled world. I tried freelancing. I tried giving advice to startups. I even attended one of those bullshit networking events where everyone's wearing name tags and pretending they're not desperate. One guy tried to sell me crypto advice in exchange for coffee. Another woman asked if I'd be willing to work just for equity in a company that hadn't even launched a website yet. I walked out before the finger foods ran out. I'd hit bottom or something that smelled a lot like it. I spent most of October sitting in a lawn chair on my porch, watching leaves fall and wondering if I'd disappeared just as quietly. And then came that night. It was raining hard, that kind of cold November rain that seeps into your bones, and I was already 3 drinks deep, cheap bourbon, not the good kind. I had the TV on for noise, some documentary about data security that I wasn't really watching. I'd spent the day arguing with a recruiter over email who told me, in the most condescending tone possible, that maybe I should consider a career coach. So I opened my laptop and searched tech jobs no experience required, like some clueless college kid. One result caught my eye: an online course on systems architecture, taught by some ex-Google engineer with a man bun and too many followers. I clicked out of boredom. The first 10 minutes annoyed me. The next 30 made me curious. 3 hours later, I was taking notes with a legal pad like a damn freshman. I don't even remember going to bed that night. By the end of that week, hell, maybe 8 straight days without a break, I lost track. I had devoured 4 courses, built 2 demo systems in a sandbox server, and started reading Reddit threads about architecture patterns like they were thriller novels. It was like some forgotten part of my brain had kicked back into gear, like muscles remembering how to move. I wasn't just learning. I was good. Scary good. Maybe it was all those years building logistics frameworks, the project management spreadsheets, the legacy systems I had to work around like broken bones. Maybe I'd always had this ability, but no one bothered to ask if I could do more than keep the lights on. I started building a portfolio. I threw together a few case studies, posted mock scenarios, contributed to some open source work. I joined forums, answered questions, asked better ones. I started talking like a person who belonged. I wasn't begging for jobs anymore. I was building things that didn't need permission. The old Michael, the the one who smiled through humiliation at farewell parties, was gone. This version didn't give a damn about fitting in. I was building something for me. By January, I'd gotten a message from a company I hadn't even applied to, a recruiter who saw my answers on a forum and wanted to talk. We had a casual Zoom call. 2 days later, I was on a video interview with the CTO. A week after that, they made me an offer. Full-time. Remote. Senior level. Stock options. I tried to play it cool, but when I got off that final call, I laughed so hard I nearly knocked over my chair. Cronex Technologies. Fastest growing systems platform in the Southwest. Big name. Good people. And somehow, by some twist of the universe, they wanted me to lead the product development team. 6 months ago, I was sipping bourbon in the dark wondering if I had anything left to offer. Today, I'm in charge of 15 developers, 3 product managers, and a budget that would have made Jerry shit his pants. I still keep that notebook, by the way, the one labeled names that clapped. I haven't added any new names in a while, but I look at it sometimes, just to remind myself. Not out of anger, not anymore. Just clarity. Because knowing who wrote you off is one thing. But knowing they were wrong, that's where the real power begins. There's a rhythm to work that feels almost like therapy when your life used to revolve around pleasing people who never saw you, and now suddenly you're in charge of people who listen when you speak. At Cronex, things moved fast, but not chaotic fast, more like controlled momentum, the kind where every meeting had a purpose, every line of code pushed towards something meaningful, and every person on your team knew what the hell they were doing and why. And for once, I wasn't the guy behind the scenes making it all work, I was the one leading the charge. I didn't scream in meetings or bark deadlines like some blowhard with something to prove. I didn't need to. My team respected me because I treated them like people, not tools. I didn't hover, didn't micromanage, didn't pretend I knew every answer. What I did do was show up, listen, support them, challenge them when needed, and take the hits when things went sideways. I protected my team, and in return, they gave me their best. Simple, really. Which made it all the more strange how unfamiliar that level of respect still felt, even after all these months. I'd gotten used to surviving under indifference, not thriving under praise. By late spring, we were scaling up fast. New clients, new projects, new roles to fill, especially one senior-level systems strategist position that needed to be filled yesterday. We were building a second-tier architecture to handle a client integration project that could bring in over $3 million a quarter, and we needed someone who could step in with both technical fluency and leadership instincts. HR sent over a batch of candidates, 38 in total, and I was already sipping my second coffee of the morning when I opened the first resume. Most of them were solid, clean layouts, bullet points stacked with buzzwords, and work histories that ranged from impressive to forgettable. I made notes in the margins, circled a few names, skipped over obvious fluff. I was halfway through the stack when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a mistake, like some sick prank from the universe just to mess with me. Gerald E. Mathers. There it was, typed out in that sharp black font, like it didn't carry the weight of 2 decades of condescension and insult behind it. My hand froze. I stared at the name for a long minute, wondering if it was a coincidence. But then I saw the work history. Greystone Logistics, Chief Operations Officer, 2007 to 2023. There was no mistaking it. The same smug bastard who once stood in a break room and called me just filler was now applying to me, to my team, for a job he would have once scoffed at from a corner office while sipping overpriced espresso. The resume was longer than it needed to be. I could see the desperation bleeding through the fluff, contract stints listed as full-time roles, dates stretched to hide gaps, vague phrases like strategic consultant and executive advisor that screamed unemployed in a suit. He had no current employer listed. No references, just a line that said available upon request. His LinkedIn profile was inactive, his certifications expired, and his cover letter was a pathetic attempt at humility. Seeking a dynamic and collaborative environment to leverage my experience in systems operations and team leadership. It almost made me laugh. I flipped the page, checked the application date. Submitted 3 days ago. He must have known, had to have known, that Cronex was my new home. Unless he was blind, or in complete denial, or so desperate that he didn't care anymore. That part one wasn't sure about yet. But what I was sure about was the wave of heat that rose in my chest when I saw that name. It wasn't anger exactly, not like before. It was something colder, sharper, almost surgical. It was control. The kind I'd never had when he was my boss. But now? Now, I was the one with the pen. I leaned back in my chair, the resume still in my hands, and I smiled quietly, like someone savoring the first sip of something bitter they've grown to appreciate. The irony was too perfect to ignore, too symmetrical to be accidental. This was more than a full-circle moment. This was the damn universe handing me a loaded gun and asking politely if I wanted to take the shot. I didn't schedule the interview immediately. I waited a full 24 hours, letting the thought marinate. I imagined him sitting at a dining table late at night, fingers crossed, checking his email like a teenager hoping for a college acceptance letter. I imagined the slow panic setting in as he realized no one was calling back, as his savings dwindled, as his wife asked if anything had come through. I imagined all of it, not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity. I wanted to know what his silence felt like. I wanted to taste it. The next morning, I walked into HR, set his file on the desk, and said the words as calmly as I've ever said anything in my life. I'll handle this one personally. Schedule him for Friday morning. There was a slight raise of the eyebrows, but no questions. One of the benefits of being respected was that you didn't have to explain yourself. They trusted my judgment. They didn't know the history behind that name, and they didn't need to. Not yet. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and pulled the old notebook out of the bottom drawer. Names That Clapped was still written in black marker across the front, now faded with time and a little frayed at the corners. I flipped through the pages until I saw his name again. Gerald Mathers. The first name on the list. The original reason I picked up the pen. And now? He was finally walking into my room. Not as a king. Not as a boss. Not even as an equal. But as a man looking for mercy from someone he once dismissed like static noise. And I was damn sure going to give him the attention he never gave me. Friday morning came with a chill in the air, the kind that seeps into your sleeves even if the sun's pretending to shine, and I arrived earlier than usual, not because I needed to prep. I'd already reviewed his resume 3 times, committed every line to memory, and run through the conversation in my head until it played like a script, but because I wanted the room to feel like mine when he walked in. There's a certain psychological weight to owning the space someone else once ruled, and I wanted every inch of this glass-walled conference room to echo with that quiet power. I wore my simplest suit, nothing flashy, nothing to distract, just sharp enough to say I belong here, but modest enough to keep the trap from springing too soon. The coffee was fresh, the chairs arranged, the door left slightly ajar, every detail calibrated like a scene from a play I was directing. HR buzzed me a few minutes before 9, said the candidate had arrived, and I told them to send him in. And then he walked through the door. Jerry Mathers didn't swagger like he used to. The first thing I noticed was how small he looked, shoulders hunched, suit a little loose in the jacket, like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His hair, once aggressively brown, was mostly gray now, trimmed close to hide the thinning, but it didn't fool anyone. His face had that creased, restless quality you only see on men who once had power but no longer understood why it slipped through their fingers. Still, there was something familiar in his posture, that subtle upward tilt of the chin that said he wasn't ready to kneel. Not yet. He stepped in with a rehearsed smile and extended his hand automatically. "Hi there, Gerald Mathers. Pleasure to meet you." I stood slowly, returned the handshake with a firm grip, and said, "Michael Trent. I'll be conducting your interview today." There was the briefest flicker in his eyes, like a glitch in a system, then it vanished. He blinked once, smiled again, and said, "Oh, Michael. Right. Good to meet you. He didn't know. Or if he did, he was playing the long game, waiting for a cue. We sat. I opened with standard questions, nothing too pointed at first. Tell me about your last role, I asked, watching his face closely. What were your core responsibilities day to day? He launched into his speech like he'd done it 100 times, using every corporate cliché in the book. Stakeholder alignment, process optimization, scalable infrastructure, cross-functional synergy. It was all buzzwords and vague references, the kind of filler language people use when they're trying to dress up basic competence in a rented tuxedo. And the irony didn't escape me, not for a second. Filler. That word rang in my head, like a cruel joke playing in reverse. He spoke for 10 minutes without pause, pausing only to sip water and grin like he'd impressed me. At one point, he interrupted my follow-up to circle back to something he thought was important to highlight, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. There it was again, his old habit of talking over people, assuming his experience carried more weight, more importance. Even now, knees wobbling behind a smile, he couldn't help himself. But I didn't bite. I didn't correct. I just let him run. I nodded, scribbled notes I didn't need to take, and asked the questions that gave him room to show off. What would your former team say about your leadership style? I asked with a straight face. His eyes lit up like I'd tossed him a softball. They'd tell you I'm firm, but fair. I always pushed for excellence, but I never asked for anything I wouldn't do myself. My door was always open. You don't hold a leadership position for 16 years unless you're doing something right. That line hung in the air longer than it should have, and for a moment, he really looked at me, and something behind his smile shifted, just slightly. His eyes narrowed a fraction. His lips twitched at the corners. There was the beginning of a question forming on his face, like a ghost he couldn't quite place. I kept going, asking about conflict resolution, about product scalability, about how he would integrate into a team younger than him, sharper than him, faster than what he was used to. He answered all of it with practice charm, the kind you polish in boardrooms and luncheons and pointless retreats where nothing real ever happens. But the cracks were showing. The confidence had an edge of desperation. He needed this. That much was obvious now. Toward the end of the interview, he leaned forward slightly, as if he was finally realizing something wasn't quite right. Michael. Trent. Was it? You seem familiar. Have we crossed paths before? I smiled, polite but distant, and said, Not that I recall, no. He let it go. He had to. The uncertainty in his eyes told me he wasn't sure if it was worth pursuing. Or maybe he didn't want to admit to himself that the man he once dismissed had just sat through an entire conversation, calmly and quietly, without flinching once. I closed the interview with a handshake and the same practiced line I'd heard so many times in the past. Well, thank you for your time, Gerald. We'll be in touch. He stood, adjusted his jacket like it still fit, and left the room with a stiff nod. When the door closed behind him, I didn't move right away. I just sat there, staring at the empty chair, and let the silence settle in. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, not loud, not triumphant, just solid. Like something had been put back in place after sitting crooked for too long. He still didn't recognize me. But he would. By this afternoon, he'd get the rejection email, cordial, professional, and signed with my full name. And whether he figured it out then, or in a week, or in the middle of some sleepless night, when it finally hit him who had been sitting across the table, well, that was up to him. All I knew was that I'd waited 22 years to say nothing at all. And it felt better than any speech I could have given. The morning after I sent the rejection email, I felt something I didn't expect. An odd stillness in my chest that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't guilt either. It was something quieter, something heavier, something that didn't fit neatly into the revenge fantasy box we all carry somewhere in the back of our heads. I had imagined this moment for months, hell, maybe years if I'm honest with myself, and yet, standing there in my office with the blinds still half closed and the soft hum of monitors kicking on around me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. You'd think after everything that man put me through, I'd be grinning ear to ear, pouring a whiskey into my morning coffee, or high-fiving myself in the bathroom mirror like some damn action movie character. But life doesn't give you that kind of neat closure. It gives you complicated echoes that live behind your ribs and questions that refuse to sit down and shut up. I stared at my inbox for a long while after hitting send, not because I regretted it, but because I realized something even deeper had been cracked open, and it wasn't about Jerry anymore. It was about me. For 22 years, I had let men like him define the ceiling above my head. I had measured my value by how quietly I could operate, how seamlessly I could absorb other people's chaos, how much I could produce without becoming a problem. They called it being dependable, but it was really just being invisible in a way that was useful. I wasn't the guy they called to lead, or speak, or change direction. I was the guy they relied on to keep the train from derailing after someone else drove it into a ditch. And the moment I stopped being useful, they didn't even pretend to look back. So when Jerry's name landed on my desk, I thought it would be simple. A neat circle. He humiliated me in front of my peers, reduced my entire career to a joke and a farewell toast, and now I had the power to end his next chapter before it even started. It should have been clean. But nothing is clean when history is involved. Nothing's clean when silence is the only language you were ever allowed to speak. The message came in around 11 the next morning. It was short, typed from what looked like a personal email, the kind of address people keep from their early internet days, long before professionalism mattered. The subject line just said, about the interview, and the body of the message read, Michael, if this is about the past, I understand. I wasn't always kind. I know that. I know I messed up with a lot of people, but I need this job. I really do. My wife is sick, and our insurance ran out last month. I'll take anything entry-level, part-time, anything. Just don't ignore this. Please. I read it once, then again. Then I just sat there with the words burning on the screen like they were pulsing. And for the first time, I felt a tug, not pity, not empathy exactly, but something adjacent. Something uncomfortable. Because even though the bastard never remembered my face, even though he never respected me, even though he made me feel like wallpaper after years of loyalty, I still understood what it meant to be desperate. I understood what it meant to be afraid. And the part of me that wasn't poisoned by bitterness wanted to respond. Wanted to say, I know what it's like. But the other part, the stronger part, the part that had spent years being dismissed, stayed still. Instead of writing back, I printed the message. It came out of the tray warm, the ink still drying at the edges. I took it, folded it slowly, and slid it into a file folder I kept at the bottom of my drawer. It was labeled in thick black marker, not just filler. That file wasn't just for him. It held reminders, emails I never sent, performance reports I was never credited for, handwritten notes from junior staff thanking me for support when no one else listened. It held proof, not for anyone else, not for show, but for me. Proof that I had been more than the invisible man. More than the safe pair of hands. More than the filler in someone else's story. That afternoon, with the air growing thick and still outside the office window, I found myself driving without a clear destination. My hands steered toward the old part of town almost by instinct, and before I realized it, I was pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of Greystone Logistics. The building hadn't changed much. Same weather-stained brick, same dying trees trying to look alive, same rusted security sign on the chain-link fence that had never really worked. It looked smaller now, like a relic. Like a place people passed without noticing. I stepped out of the car and stood across the street, watching the entrance. I didn't walk closer. I didn't need to. From where I stood, I could see the flicker of the old fluorescent lights inside, still struggling to stay on, like the place couldn't decide whether to die or hold on a little longer. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20, just breathing in the quiet. I thought about all the mornings I'd rushed through that door, carrying the weight of other people's panic. I thought about all the years I'd spent inside, solving problems no one thanked me for, cleaning up messes no one remembered making. And I thought about Jerry. Alone, desperate, staring at an inbox that wouldn't reply. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need noise or applause or witnesses. There's a kind of power in choosing silence when the world expects fury. I didn't burn his house down. I didn't expose him, didn't gloat, didn't deliver a speech about karma. I just closed a door he never thought he'd have to knock on. Because sometimes silence screams louder than revenge. But this was both.